Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
On this episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify presidential Green Party candidate, Dr. Jill Stein. She is a Harvard-educated doctor, a pioneering environmental health advocate, and an organizer for people, planet, and peace. Dr. Stein has helped lead initiatives to fight environmental racism, injustice, and pollution, to promote healthy communities, and to revitalize democracy. She is dedicated to offering a choice beyond the failed two-party system, and her campaign centers on a pro-worker, anti-war, and climate action agenda. And unlike Biden and Trump, she's against genocide, she's against ethnic cleansing, she's against war, and she isn't afraid to say free Palestine. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Follow us on Instagram, X, and Threads with the handle @SumudPod, or Facebook and LinkedIn @Sumud Podcast. Dr. Stein, welcome.
Great to be with you, Ed. Thanks so much.
So for those who don't know a lot about Dr. Stein, what do you want them to know about you? What would you like them to learn about you?
I'm a mother and a medical doctor working basically lifelong to make the world safe for children. And I'd say my mission really grows out of my experience as a medical doctor, trying to make the world a safe and healthy place, initially in the doctor's office, because that's where you kind of start as a medical professional. But very quickly, you got to go beyond that, because our health is not determined by what happens. Everybody needs access to healthcare and pharmaceuticals and all that. But if that's all you have, there's just no attaining health whatsoever. So I basically moved from trying to work upstream with the determinants of health, everything from poverty to pollution to inadequate food supply, food deserts, lack of housing, et cetera. I began working upstream and discovered that we're working against all the forces arrayed against us, the various profiteering special interests, from health insurance to big pharma to the real estate industry, you name it, across the board. And especially war contractors, and these are elements of our health as well, particularly poverty and inequality and war. So, as I made it out, into the community-based fight, I discovered that basically our government and powerful corporations, billionaires, the economic elites, want to keep things the way they are, and we can't move. So my fight just got bigger and bigger, to where I moved from clinical medicine to political medicine, to address the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system. So that's kind of where my story, that's my background for the most part. Yeah. I mean, there are other pieces of it, but we can go into if they're relevant.
Well, actually, one of your first jobs was a waitress, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
That's not commonly known, but yes, that was a first.
I think it's important for anybody in any profession to work in the restaurant business as a waiter or waitress for a period of time. Yep. You sort of learn how to deal with different people and personalities. So I think that's important.
Yes. And you also kind of take the system, you take it on the chin from a system that does not support working people, and people in that position as servers tend to be very vulnerable, and to, the miserable payment, the tipped wage, the tipped minimum wage, which is about $2.50 an hour, something like that, relying on tips, which are not always, forthcoming at all. It's a very precarious existence for people in that service industry.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you grew up in Chicago. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you grew up in an apolitical family. And the early trajectory for you, or the goal, I think, was to, if I remember reading this right, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were supposed to essentially be a housewife eventually, right? And not necessarily enter the fray of politics. Is that accurate?
I think that was the expectation of my era, because the women's movement was only just getting started. So yeah, I I had mixed messages, and my mother was a housewife, but a very frustrated housewife, I think. So I think she instilled into her daughters, the intention not to be, not to be a passive participant. Not that housewives, or homemakers are passive. They have a very important job to do. But I was part of that generation that was kind of challenging a lot of restrictions. So while the expectations were, on one hand, you don't shake things up, you don't rattle the cages at all. And I was coming from, I was basically second generation immigrant, Jewish immigrants, and the focus was very much on acquiring security and stability and raising your family. And that was kind of, the scene that I was raised into, but there was a lot surrounding that.
And you witnessed to an extent the civil rights movement and the MLK assassination. What do you remember about that period, if you're able to share?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the MLK assassination, followed by, RFK assassination. It was such a turbulent period. And the civil rights movement, I think, was like a lifeline for so many people who felt kind of, very suspended and dissatisfied, and like something's really wrong with the way the world is working in kind of the post-World War II Cold War, the era of McCarthyism, the sense of conformity that, that you shouldn't criticize the political system, And I was growing up in a Jewish suburb of Chicago, and the focus was very much on, acquiring financial security. And to me, it was like really, very offensive, and just did not address sort of bigger issues that were being raised by the civil rights movement, and and then by the women's movement as well, and the climate movement, and the war in Vietnam, which was really one of the first things that I became active in without really like understanding it or thinking that I ever could understand politics. I always thought it was something that was way beyond someone of my, kind of sort of grassroots. I didn't have kind of any kind of political framework to understand the world, and all I knew that was just that something was really terribly wrong. And the civil rights movement was an expression of that. And so it was really something that I strongly identified with. I became involved in high school with tutoring projects and things like that were, like how we were going to address the scourge of segregation. And, I was in a very segregated, largely Jewish community is all it was. It was segregated itself. And, voluntarily segregated, but there were all kinds of, ethnicity and class issues and anti-Semitism that was, felt much more prominent. It was in the wake of the Second World War. There was a lot of, consciousness of the Holocaust, and as Jews were we, accepted as equal members of society. There was a sense that, no, we were locked out. So all those things were kind of in the mix, but I felt like I was living in a very privileged world, and it didn't feel right, and it did not have an answer to that privilege.
And you spent some time in Sweden. I think Sweden was a bit of an inflection point for your life. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I went on what was called the Experiment in International Living. I don't even know if it's still around. And it was a program to bring young people of various backgrounds together and to take them somewhere outside of the U.S. And I went to Sweden mainly because my parents thought I should do that. So, travel, mixing it up would be good. So I did that, and I found myself with a socialist from New York. I never knew about socialism before. An African-American from L.A. at the time of the Watts uprising, and various assorted others, but it was a much more diverse crew than I had ever seen before. And we were going to Sweden, which at the time was a socialist democracy, more socialist than I think it is today. And, this was like when the anti-Vietnam movement and the civil rights movement were really taking off. And it was a really life-changing experience, I think, for everyone on that group. And we had, an amazing musician in the group, actually from LA, from the ghetto in LA. And we did a lot of music in railroad stations and just singing in public places and experiencing in a very visceral way the vision of the civil rights movement through the music, I guess. And it was it was really quite a world-changing experience for me. And when I came back to my senior year in high school, I sort of repudiated my life as I knew it. And it was quite, sort of jarring for my parents, who thought that they lost their daughter in Sweden, and it kind of began a life of, just seriously refusing to cooperate with a system that felt really corrupt and harmful.
Did you feel cheated or tricked, rather, because of the way the system was designed?
Yes, absolutely. And, and I was very inclined for a while to blame my family of origin and my parents for having raised me in a bubble. And, and I kind of went to college thinking, I don't want to be a part of that bubble, and then I grew to understand that, we all have options. And I came from an environment that gave me enormous capacity and really, best education, public school education. And then I went to a private college, but I really had all the supports to become equipped to grapple with that world. So, eventually I came to greatly appreciate, what I had been given, instead of, sort of obsessing about what I didn't have, because I didn't have like some socialist family that could have introduced me to the world of activism and kind of a more political activist understanding of the world, which I only very slowly acquired over the course of decades, I have to say. And it wasn't until my hair was this color, and I was 50 years old, that I actually engaged in an all-out fight. Prior to that, I was an activist in social movements, but I never came to understand until much later on what Frederick Douglass said, which was, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. You really have to challenge power. And it took me a long, long time to get up the nerve to actually step outside of my upbringing to be a total team player for whatever I happen to be in. You can't always be a team player. You have to say, no, this is not what we can do. We can't do this. And I have to say also, my upbringing after the Holocaust, I was an active member. Well, I was as a kid, as a child, I was an active member in my synagogue, and I joined the children's choir, and I took seriously, kind of the teachings of Reform Judaism, which are kind of, sort of common sense morality, I have to say. I took that very seriously, and I took very seriously the idea that we are responsible for each other. And, the saying on the outside of my synagogue was, I forget where it's from in the Old Testament, but it's like, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That said to me, justice, this is about justice, and human compassion is what we're supposed to do. And that really is what we're grounded in. And I really took that seriously. And that kind of became a real foundation for my life going forward. I think that is sort of, it speaks to this kind of, a sense of social responsibility that we see from, like Jewish Voice for Peace and stuff like that. It was really common in my generation growing up in the wake of the Holocaust, and beyond my generation too, I have to say, but especially for my generation growing up right after the Holocaust, grappling with how do you go forward in a world that has just committed massive genocide against you. Not that Jews are the sole, recipients of that. There's African Americans, there's indigenous people and all that, and Palestinians and lots of, Africans and people around the world. But for us, that was like, how do you get past that? And how we got past it in my community was by affirming that, number one, genocide is not just the responsibility of the perpetrator, it's the responsibility of the bystander. And that was a very big thing that, like, we had to resolve that this would never happen again, not just to Jews, but to anybody. We would not be a bystander to genocide. And that was just really foundational in my family and my community. Was this like throughout my family? I don't know that, but like in the conversations, the formative conversations between me and my mother, especially, this was like a very big thing. What are we responsible for? So that was just really like ingrained into me.
And at what point did you realize that Zionism specifically was a problem?
I did not understand that Zionism was a thing even. I just thought it was reality, that this was, this was the destiny of the Jewish people following the Holocaust. That's kind of how it was taught to me. And it wasn't something to be debated. There was no other side of the story. That's kind of how I learned it. But there was enough about the whole kind of upbringing at that time that I did not want to be caught up in that, in whatever it was, this kind of nationalism or even ethnocentrism. So I was confirmed, which is like not like being bar or bat mitzvah. It's what you do if you're Reform Jewish. So I went through that process. But by the time I got to the end of it, I was just, raising bigger questions about, what is the role of religion in my life and in the world. And I did not go to Israel. I think maybe one of my sisters didn't go either. I'm not sure, but it was very common, to go to Israel and be, kind of be brought into, be engaged in that process of developing. And my grandfather's name was Israel. I was born on Mother's Day. So like I was, had this intense bond with my mother. And, there was a lot of pressure to be a part of, to be a good daughter, to be a good Jew, and, to stay in the fold. And, I didn't, but our generation was breaking away at the time. I remember my oldest cousin married a woman who was not Jewish and was disowned by the family. By the time I got married, which was, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 years later, it didn't matter whatsoever. And my grandfather, whose name was Israel and intensely identified with Israel and Jewish culture and religion, he didn't really care either. So things were evolving. But as a kid, I had sort of resisted being totally swept up in that system. It wasn't until I was a part of the Green Party.
So I found it interesting that you had mentioned in one of your interviews that you went to Harvard mainly because your mom encouraged you to. I want to ask, if you could do it all over again, would you have gone to Harvard?
So I wouldn't go to Harvard today because it's become such a neoliberal, factory for global, neoliberalism and oppression and leaders of empire. So I really would not want to have anything to do that whole class of Ivy League schools. I really wouldn't want to be there. When I was there, there was a very strong resistance movement. We shut the school down as part of the Vietnam protests, and we opened a community university, a public university. So it was a very it had a very strong kind of element of political resistance there. So there were, I got a great education there, that's for sure. And then there was a lot of, doors open with that label. And that was useful. That has been useful along the way. But, in terms of like connecting with people there, it was not a place to make lasting connections with the movement. But that's okay. I then went on to Harvard Medical School, and that had its, great education. I think there I would rather have gone to a medical school that was more grounded in community service as opposed to like academia and research that's kind of connected with big pharma and industry. So, yeah. But, how do you ever know what you should have done? It's like, because had I found a more welcoming place in medicine, I might not have moved beyond medicine from clinical medicine to political medicine. So maybe it was the best in the long run. Anyhow, it's hard to know.
Yeah, no, that's.
I don't pass judgment on it.
Yeah, you use the word neoliberal. Could you define that just for the audience?
Yeah, so neoliberalism is kind of like where the Democratic Party is right now. It pretends to be liberal, but in fact, its real agenda is privatization, austerity, major tax giveaways to the wealthy. And it doesn't call itself conservative. It calls itself modern, but this is what really is assaulting working people right now and making the world incredibly unlivable. It allows the economic elites to basically rule the day without looking, so-called conservative. If you want to know what neoliberalism is, just look at the leadership of the Democratic Party. That's neoliberal.
And how does that differ from the Green Party platform? And we're going to unpack the Green Party a little bit more later on, but just...
Yeah, so the Green Party is a people-powered party. That is, we do not take money from corporate PACs, from super PACs, dark money organizations, or other loopholes for legalized bribery, which is how our political system works. And, it's widely known, it's no secret that we have the best democracy money can buy, which is no democracy whatsoever. The agenda of both our Capitol Hill in DC, as well as our state houses in the 50 states, are really run by lobbyists and big campaign contributors. That's how the system works, and it delivers. It delivers for its donors. And, if you look at what Congress passes, it's what lobbyists and big donors want. It is definitely not what people want. And you can pretty much be sure that if it is something the public wants, like healthcare as a human right for everyone, or a ceasefire and an immediate diplomatic solution to the genocide that Israel's conducting, which the public enormously wants, that doesn't count whatsoever. We have a money-driven system. So since the Green Party is not part of that money-driven system whatsoever, we play by the rules. Our contributions are limited by the maximum donations. We play according to the rules, not sort of these new loopholes that have been integrated into the rules. So what the public wants is what we want. We don't take the money, so we don't even look at the agenda of AIPAC or of the big pharma or the health insurance industry or the fossil fuels. We really look at what the public wants and needs, and that's who we are as Greens. And, basically that's what our agenda reflects. In this race, we are the only anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker, climate emergency campaign that's on the ballot for a majority of voters. We are it, basically, for a real challenge to empire and oligarchy. There are other wonderful progressive voices out there, but they do not have the grassroots political network to have gotten on the ballot for a majority of voters and continuing forward from there. We hope to be on the ballot for every voter, and we encourage everyone, please go to jillstein2024.com, and you can go to the ballot access page, which is up there on the drop-down menu. Go to the ballot page and see if you have a ongoing petition drive, which you can help in if it's going on in your state. If you don't have a drive, you may already be on the ballot. Then you can make a contribution to help us, because we are very much under attack as the one campaign that is not symbolic. We are not simply a message. We are actually challenging power by being on the ballot for the majority of voters.
And one thing I found fascinating, your favorite president was Franklin D. Roosevelt. And by that, I mean Eleanor Roosevelt. What do you think either of them would do today?
I think Eleanor would just carry on. Her agenda, I think, it's an agenda of justice. It's an economic bill of rights, which is a leading element, is a leading plank in our platform, an economic bill of rights, which is basically a guarantee of good wage jobs and healthcare as a human right, affordable housing as a human right, education, including higher education, which should be free. Quality transportation, which is also either affordable or should be free. We can do this. And Eleanor Roosevelt was just very relentless in her commitment to that. And that her vision lives on very much. And she was also an internationalist. She really saw people as people and, saw that war is not the answer. Always, the last resort, but, for this country, it's the first resort, and makes impossible the meeting dire, urgent economic needs of working people and, the marginalized in this country. And currently, the bottom 50% has 2% of wealth, which is not enough to live on. So, and the emergency is growing, and we saw the wealth of billionaires basically double over the period of the COVID greedflation, shall we say, that took place at that time. And, the shift in national priorities and also the subsidies that were given to corporate America as part of the response to COVID. But, everyday people are being thrown under the bus, from crushing inequality, climate collapse, which is hitting, in the most disadvantaged communities, the worst, a healthcare system that leaves, almost 70,000 people dying each year from lack of healthcare, 100 million Americans struggling with medical debt, 44 million locked into student debt. We can fix these problems, but we can fix them much better and faster if we stop robbing ourselves blind with this massive and dangerous, bloated military budget. And if we turn the White House into a greenhouse, we will cut the military budget in half, at least, so we can basically start putting our dollars into true security here at home. Because currently the military budget usurps a full half of our congressional dollars are used for what? These endless wars that make us less secure, not more secure, that create failed states like Libya and Iraq, Iran itself, although, that went back to our intervention in the 1950s, where we overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran because they were going to use Iran's resources for Iran instead of allowing BP, British Petroleum, and the U.S. to control those resources. So this is a horrible problem which generates not only failed states, mass refugee migrations, continuing terrorist threats. According to the Brown University's Cost of War project, the U.S. is now conducting so-called anti-terror special operations, basically small wars, skirmishes in 85 countries around the world. We have, some 800 military bases in just about all countries around the world. We have sanctions in force now against 1/3 of the world's population, sanctions which are actually illegal according to international law. So, the empire, the U.S. empire, is still very much what Martin Luther King said. My country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. That violence costs us all around the world. It also costs us here at home. This is absolutely unsustainable. It's not only a war against working people, it's also a war against our democracy. And we are paying that price as well. So on all those accounts, this has to be stopped. And this is, like the leading issue in our platform is to cut the military budget, at least by half. That together with Medicare for All, which pays for itself by reducing red tape and bureaucracy, so we can actually expand healthcare so it covers everyone comprehensively, including your eyeglasses, your hearing aid, your mental health, your dental health, etc. Everything is covered for everyone. Massively expand healthcare, but we save so much money by chucking this whole system of a gazillion insurers, each with different insurance policies. So you have to have a massive bureaucracy tracking who spent what on what. It's just a mountain of busy work. And at the end of the day, if you replace that with a single payer system, basically like Medicare, but expanded and simplified and improved, we save 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars right now is being spent on basically red tape and bureaucracy. It's so wasteful. So that too can help fund the rest of the things that we need to do, like building sufficient public housing that is so-called social housing, which is also an investment. These things are doable if we, the people, are in charge instead of having the foxes running the chicken coop, which is the way that it works right now.
Yeah. And I have some questions about the military budget, but I'll get to that a little bit later. I did want to jump in and talk about Palestine a little bit here. Obviously, as you know, this podcast was inspired by Palestine. So I created to discuss the plight of the Palestinians and all marginalized groups. Assuming you win, or let's say when you win, what does your first 30 days look like vis-a-vis the occupation and genocide in Palestine?
So on day one, the genocidal war stops. Joe Biden has the power to do that right now if he picked up the phone. Dwight Eisenhower did that in the 50s, I think. And Ronald Reagan also did that in the 1980s. Basically stopped Israel on a dime from conducting devastating wars. And in the 80s, under Reagan, it was an invasion of Lebanon where supposedly the PLO were being chased. But, it was just, complete, blanket saturation warfare like it is right now. They go after one alleged leader of Hamas and they'll just murder a whole settlement of people, dropping these 8 bunker buster bombs, these 2,000-pound bombs. I guess it was 4 of them. It was like 8 tons of bombs, which I think is 4 of the bunker busters. I didn't realize they had even gone back to using them because supposedly they were pausing them, but somehow they got started up again. Surprise, surprise. Oh. And those were dropped, supposedly in pursuit of one alleged leader of Hamas. But that's used as an excuse basically to exterminate an entire people. And there is a larger agenda going on here. But the point I want to make is that the flow of these weapons absolutely stops. And because it's illegal right now, it's illegal. It's not only against international law, it is against U.S. law. It is against U.S. law to provide military assistance to any group that is, and any government that is violating human rights, that is interfering with the delivery of humanitarian aid, and which is violating nuclear weapons treaties. And Israel has it on all three counts. The flow of weapons must be stopped immediately. And because Israel entirely depends on the U.S. for its survival, it cannot go forward when it is clear that the U.S. is not going to allow this. So that stops on day one, as far as I'm concerned. The war stops, but there's a much longer agenda here, because the war, the genocidal war, is an expression of both occupation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. And the ethnic cleansing really has been hardwired into Israel's agenda since before its forming. And that became clear with the opening up of Israel's National Historic Archives. It became clear that actually this was the terror campaign to displace Palestinians was longstanding and was really written into the agenda here. So there's a much bigger agenda that will begin, which is that Israel needs to sit down and begin to negotiate to come into compliance with international law. So being an equal opportunity, provider here, all parties have to comply with international law. But it is Israel, which is, the elephant in the room here, and Hamas is largely fighting for its survival and responding to 75 years of assault.
Yeah. Would you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please continue.
Well, let's say I was just, in answer to your larger question, what else changes on day one? On day one, we also declare the climate emergency, and we also begin to address the emergencies here at home. And in order to do that, we have to begin to right-size the military budget, because right now the military budget is basically disabling everything else that has to be done here. So we begin a campaign to do that. And I'll just mention three strategies. One is that the president needs to be not just the commander-in-chief, the president needs to be the organizer-in-chief. Barack Obama had pretended to do that, had a huge grassroots movement that broke all kinds of barriers that got him into office. And then he basically sent his ground troops home when it became clear, even before he took office, that he was really working for Wall Street. It was clear with the appointment of his treasurer, Larry Summers, before he even took office. So with us, it's not going to be that way. We will only get into office as a really profound grassroots movement that's on fire. Why are we on fire? Because we have to be on fire, because we are going over the cliff right now as we speak. Not only in this genocide, which is normalizing the murder and torture of children and families on an industrial scale. It's the end of human rights and international law as we know it. To see this full in the face and allow it to happen is absolutely disastrous for us all. So, when you're in the White House, you have the bully pulpit, and you have the opportunity to help educate and mobilize people. And, that's very much the name of the game. We're fighting a system right now which attempts to sideline, silence, and basically cancel its opposition. It's doing that in many ways that I hope we will talk about in a bit, because we have to fight to be heard. But it's not just to be heard. This isn't for the sake of a candidate or a party. This is for the sake of democracy and our survival that is not in the cards right now. We are on a trajectory that does not survive, whether you're looking at our catapulting towards nuclear conflict in several regions, including the Middle East. So when RFK says he's a peace candidate, he's not a peace candidate. If you support the genocidal war on the Palestinian people, you are heading for potential nuclear conflict, which is becoming more dangerous by the day. That's one way in which we're threatened. We're all threatened here by the climate crisis, and also by basically devastating and crushing economic inequality with which our economy will not survive. It's hanging in there by a thread right now. So on all of these counts, we need to mobilize by using the bully pulpit and by using our power as grassroots networks to help engage and inform people right now. We can get to the White House, and then if we're in the White House, we can then begin to move this agenda, which is not supported, obviously, in Congress. If we get elected, there will be others along with us who get elected, and there's a whole battery of wonderful Green candidates and some, who are not Green as well, who basically support a very similar people-powered agenda. And, we will be all over that agenda from day one, both by using the bully pulpit, but also by holding congressional hearings, which have largely come to a standstill. They're very important for educating the press and the public, and also restarting town hall meetings, which are no longer held because our elected officials are too busy meeting with AIPAC and and their corporate sponsors and their donors. So that's how we gin up the support to actually change the agenda.
And just going back to Palestine, would you require AIPAC to register as a foreign entity? Because I think Kennedy tried, Senator Fulbright, I believe, and Representative Finley tried as well. It never happened. How would you handle that?
Yes. I mean, my understanding is that this will be in the hands of our Justice Department. And this is another part of our day one agenda, is not only to sue to reclassify AIPAC as a foreign agent, as it should be classified. So we will use all the power of the Justice Department to do that. Another related thing, actually, which is also part of the day one agenda, is to undertake antitrust lawsuits against the corporate media. The corporate media, which has become consolidated and which really controls the message right now. We need to break up the corporate consolidated media so that we actually have, real journalism that's not just serving power, that's not just careerism, that's not just lapdog journalism. We need watchdog journalism. And to do that, we have to break up the big corporate conglomerates. And that in turn, will help provide motivation and support for, the whole agenda, including holding AIPAC accountable.
And I don't know if you can answer this, and I'm not an attorney, and I don't know how international law works, but let's take a step back. I believe you're the only candidate that has been arrested twice for good reason. You have another candidate that's been arrested, obviously, for bad reasons. And then you have another individual in Biden who should be arrested, obviously, for enabling genocide. Would you support prosecution of Biden?
Yes. And we have already called for an investigation of Biden as for war crimes, for participating in genocide. And whether that's, I think that investigation should go forward both here and in the World Court. And there have been, or the International Court of Justice, maybe both. But the U.S. is more than complicit here. We are a full partner, actually, in this genocide. And our criminal leadership needs to be on notice that they are not above the law either. They're quick to say that Donald Trump is not above the law. Well, they're not above the law either, especially as far as the lives of millions of people is concerned.
And do you believe that anyone who is living outside of Palestine has the authority to tell Palestinians how to respond to colonialism or imperialism?
So let me say that international law, it's my understanding, is not silent on this. International law grants the right of people who are occupied and basically under assault to return in force that force. At the same time, it's my understanding that international law still holds that civilians, it's not okay to attack civilians. It's not okay to attack children. That holds, but that the right to fight back against an abusive force has to be recognized. And it is so short-sighted. It's not only like a matter of international law, it's like sort of, well, duh, if people are being systematically murdered, abused, ethnically cleansed, terrorized, 500 villages burned and destroyed even before the Nakba, it's like, hello, you're not going to get rid of that by trying to suppress it. You will only further inspire resistance. And, Israel at one time considered the PLO a terrorist organization that was beyond redemption. Well, no, not so at all. And the same is true for Hamas. And Hamas has actually already stepped up to agree to the peace treaties, and itself then was a sponsor of the peace treaty that Biden then modeled his peace treaty after. So it's just false and outrageously misleading to characterize Hamas as some evil force that is not beyond redemption. That's totally false. It's like, stop attacking the Palestinian people. And Hamas has already agreed to put down its arms as well. So this is just more propaganda from Israel and the U.S. Department of Defense.
So do you support self-defense for the Palestinians? And if so, how do we sort of change that narrative within mainstream media?
I think I find it most effective to talk about ending the cycle of violence. And that as long as people are being ethnically cleansed and subject to a murderous apartheid state, they're going to fight back regardless. And that is the problem. You have to address the problem here at its origin. I think as human beings, everyone is going to fight back when they are subject to endless murder and assault. That's just how it works. And in the words of Gandhi, we subject ourselves to this eye for an eye until we're all blind. It has to stop. There's not one part. If there's one party that's responsible here, that party was the Zionists, who came in and disrupted what was actually a very peaceful relationship between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And the Zionists, this is not a religious conflict. This is a political conflict by a political ideological group called Zionists who decided that they owned the land that other people happened to occupy. That's a preposterous proposition. And as true as the problem of anti-Semitism is in Europe, not generally a problem, in Muslim countries, this was a problem that began with the movement of the Zionists into Palestine with the intention of taking over the land. Having been victims of, ethnic cleansing and genocide does not justify then conducting ethnic cleansing and genocide. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and it seems like no matter what we do, look at the BDS movement. Well, you're anti-Semitic. So any form of resistance, even this podcast to an extent, some people say, well, it's anti-Semitic when it's clearly not, right? It's anti-Zionist for sure, but it puts us in a very difficult position.
Oh, I think the claim that Zionism and that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, that's just Zionist propaganda, and I think it just has to be dismissed. It's absolutely false, and that's why it's so important that we be able to talk about this, and that's why they don't want it talked about. That's why, this heavy hand, this vicious, violent hand of censorship has come down now on the discussion, because the truth is extremely threatening here to the Zionist mythology. And I think we need to methodically just carry on and let it be known what Zionism is about. That discussion has to happen. And, it's really so outrageous that talking about Zionism is effectively being criminalized, and you put yourself in danger. If you're there protesting Zionism, you may get your head cracked. You may get thrown in jail. You may get deported if you don't have secure citizenship. You may be expelled from school. You may be blacklisted. This is the extent they have to resort to. And the fact of the matter is, the truth is already out of the bag here. There's no way they can limit people's, growth and education on this subject. So Zionism is not here to stay. It's just not. It is a ethno-nationalist religious ideologies are not helpful to the world situation today. Everyone needs to be secure, and that security cannot come at the cost of committing ethnic cleansing and genocide. So that's effectively what Zionism is and what it has always been. So, I think the more we just keep our eyes on the prize and not get distracted by the propaganda and the fear-mongering, the better. BDS is a powerful movement, and what happened to Starbucks is happening on a much broader scale, and that will continue. And the potential for everyday people to stand up and to refuse to consent to genocide, and that may mean a general strike. It may mean, massive economic boycotts for a day or 2 days. But I think people are increasingly on fire about this, as we have to be, because, just with the distraction of the presidential, the RNC and then the assassination attempt against Donald Trump, it's kind of given Israel license to really double down on violence here over these last 2 weeks. It's just shocking and unbelievably dangerous and impermissible. Life is a complete living hell, as I understand now, for greater and greater numbers. It's not only starvation, it's also like living in untreated sewage and, living without housing and without shelter and without food and without water. And people can only go so long in this state. And ever since Israel choked off the supply of food and water and fuel, 6 months ago, was it now? Or even more than that. It was very shortly after the beginning of the assault that Israel basically tightened the stranglehold around the neck of Palestinians. And I felt like, as a person with a background in health and public health, that we are on a death watch. We have been on a death watch for 9 months, and it's astounding that the people of Palestine have had the just the moral fiber to survive and to carry on day by day. And it is astounding to me that anyone can be a bystander to this. And, as it becomes increasingly desperate, it's increasingly critical for us to fight back. And I have to say, this is what animates our campaign. We know that every time we get on the ballot, we have basically pushed harder up against Joe Biden, the Democrats, and the Republicans, for them to know that there is an anti-genocide campaign that is on the ballot and getting organized and increasingly powerful, that will not be intimidated and will not be silenced. This is about not just challenging empire in November. This is about challenging empire right now, every day. Every time we succeed in getting another ballot line, there is another race, another state in which people now have a choice. And we will be the one anti-genocide choice in a campaign that's going to contain 3 pro-war, pro-genocide candidates. That is Trump, Biden, and RFK. So if they are splitting the pro-genocide, pro-war vote, and we are unifying the pro-worker anti-genocide, anti-war vote, the pro-youth vote, the anti-student debt vote, the pro-healthcare as a human right vote, we begin to get to some real numbers where we could see power really begin to change. And they know it, which is why they are working overtime right now to try to silence us, try to keep us off the ballot, to try to drag us into court, to hold on to our public funding, which we desperately need right now. They're holding on to almost $300,000 that we need immediately to be carrying on the ballot fights. And I urge everyone who wants to stop genocide now to stand up and make a contribution to our campaign right now. Do that, because that money ensures that we have another ballot line to fight genocide. If you're not on the ballot across the country, you will be marginalized, you will be sidelined, they will keep us out of the conversation. Once we're in the conversation, it's an unstoppable force. It's an absolutely unstoppable force because the American people are already on the right side of history and justice here. So just by making a contribution right now, you help us fight this fight and insist that we bring the power of democracy to bear right now to stop this genocide. And whether we win the election or we just stare them down, because we have the numbers to fight this now and for the long haul. This is how we win.
Yeah.
Together we're unstoppable.
And I want to ask a few questions about those individuals who don't believe in the third party or the ability to win. But I do want to ask one last question about Palestine. One state or two state solution, what would President Stein do?
So I think in the long run, there are many arguments why we need a one state solution, because we need democracy, justice, security, and peace for everyone, Muslims, Christians, Jews, in historical Palestine. So ideally, we want a one state. On the other hand, you have all this international law and agreements that are ready to go. And you already have, the vast majority of the UN that's already recognizing Palestine as a state. And I don't think we want to ignore that either. So my sense is that we use both of these. We start with what is available for us to utilize right now in defending the security and the lives of Palestinians. We do that now, but that we keep the heat on for ultimately a single state of democracy and justice for all.
So we've been conditioned not to take third-party candidates seriously. I think you know that. Can you explain and educate folks as to why that's the wrong perspective to hold?
So power, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. And part of the way that power holds on to power is by conducting, psyops, basically propaganda, by convincing people that they're powerless. And there's another quote here that I urge you to remember. These are the words of Alice Walker, who said that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. You do not want to take what the predator state, what the empire, what the police state says at face value. Don't. And mainstream media, the American public knows. Polls show that over half the American public automatically assumes that whatever the mainstream media is saying is false. The media is working against us. They are not on our side, and they are propagating misinformation on behalf of their corporate powers, their corporate partners in the halls of power. So we have to stand up in the halls of power for what we want. And if you accept the lesser evil concept, you've basically given away your power, which is what they want you to do. They want to talk you out of your power. They want to persuade you that you are powerless, because if you're powerless, then you'll be hopeless and you will not be a threat to empire. But we can't do that. You give up your power in democracy is your vote. You have to use your vote. The stuff about, they're spoilers, that's BS. What spoiled it for the Democrats was abandoning their base, working people, basically. They abandoned working people, people of color, the progressive movement, That was very clear in 2008 when Barack Obama and 2 Democratic houses of Congress bailed out Wall Street and threw out millions upon millions of homeowners who were basically thrown out in the street while Wall Street got bailed out to the tune of trillions of dollars. So after that betrayal, where Obama and the Democrats showed their true colors, after that betrayal in the election of 2010, the Democrats had the worst beating they've ever had. Obama called it a shellacking. They lost 1,000 members of state legislatures, 64 members of Congress, and something like 12 or 13 governors and the same number of senators. So they were wiped out. There was no third party to blame it on. This is not the fault of third parties, the fact that the Democrats are up a creek. They have basically abandoned their base, which is why their base has kind of been drawn into the Republican sphere, because desperate people will support demagogues, and desperate people, are voting against Democrats. And this was what helped launch Trump. It was that the Democrats had abandoned their base. So people were voting against Hillary Clinton, not for Donald Trump when he got elected. And that is the problem here. You have to stand up and be what you're about. If you do that, then people will vote for you. Right now, the largest demographic is people who don't vote and don't want to vote. In 2016, it was 100 million people. Now it's something less than that, but it's about one out of every 3 voters right now. Didn't vote in 2020, and it could be much larger than that right now if people feel like it's these same old, geezers that are being rammed down their throat. People who don't vote tend to be people who are lower income, of color, and younger. They're just too disillusioned to vote because they're being denied either other options or even knowing that they have other choices whatsoever. So this is why, the saturation blackout here in the media. So that's why it's very important to use your power. We have the power. If you just look at the number of people who aren't voting, if you just look at the number of people, 68% who want to stop the genocide now, if you look at 100 million who are locked into medical debt, or 44 million locked into student debt, all of this is fixable and solvable. So we have more than a majority who could actually win a 2-way race if we can be heard. Given that the Democrats are so incredibly inept, weak, incompetent, cannot even resolve their push-pull about Joe Biden. Will we keep him? Will we not? If not him, then who? And the fact that they're trying to keep him when he is so incredibly, he keeps saying, I'm going to do better than that debate. But then he keeps repeating that unbelievable performance where he can hardly, he's not always like Looney Tunes, but he can't really communicate and can't say what he means and gets lost in his thoughts and his words and his voice trails off. This is not the guy you want to be woken up in the middle of the night with the red telephone, with the hotline that, should he push the button or not? This is not a world leader. So yeah, unfortunately, Biden is not the force that we need. And with Trump having had this little act of fate here, having been subject to an assassination attempt that really mobilizes a lot of sympathy for him, and he's very good on the PR and got the perfect photo op out of it. It's very unlikely that the Democrats left to their own devices here could rally somehow miraculously and beat Trump. It's, in fact, many of them have already publicly stated that they're not going to beat Trump and that Trump is an unbeatable force. Yes, it is an unbeatable force when all you offer is a weaker version of Trump. No, we have to do what France did, which was bring progressive forces together and stand up with an agenda that's actually fighting for working people. That's how we mobilize. That's how we solve these problems. And that's how we trounce, this shift to the right by both the Democrats and the Republicans. So that means we have to stand up and vote for what we want. We have to vote for the only campaign on the ballot for a majority of voters that is anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker, and climate action. We can do that and turn this race in direction that no one in their wildest imagination anticipated.
The other day, I posted on social media, there is no way I would vote for Biden or Trump. And part of that reason is, I don't know if you heard of that Al Jazeera Fault Lines documentary that basically showed the events leading up to Hind's murder. And every time I hear her voice, I basically said there's no way I could ever vote for Biden. And obviously, I'm not going to vote for Trump. And obviously, I got tons of messages. Some of them said, of course, let's go with Jill Stein. And I think you were tagged about 1 million times. But then I also got these messages that, well, if you vote for third party, then you're voting for Trump. Can you give me an answer for these people who say that to me?
Well, so for one thing, the practical matter is that if the contest is between Trump and Biden, Trump is going to win. I mean, there's so many scenarios now where Trump is going to win. So if Trump is going to win, we need to be building a strong alternative to Trump. And that's how we stand up against Trump. That's one response. Another response is that if you don't stand up now, when are you going to stand up? How much worse do you get than a genocider? How can you say that that Trump is the problem and not Biden, when Biden is leading the charge on genocide, on censorship, on this race into World War III and nuclear weapons? I mean, Biden represents all terrible things right now, at least as much as Trump, if not more. So I would say you've unfortunately been drinking the Kool-Aid if you think that our major duty here is to simply avoid the election of Trump. It's not clear who is the lesser evil right now. And the argument can be made that Trump did not start new wars. He did not start major new wars. Not that he is, blameless by any means or not a danger. He's every bit as much a danger. They're both a danger. Why should you accept this danger? And they could have easily solved this problem by adopting ranked choice voting, which is a voting system reform. It's used in like at least 25 major cities around the country. It's used in countries around the world. It prevents any splitting of the vote, any spoiling. It ensures that if your first choice loses, your vote is automatically assigned then to your second choice. So they make this issue of spoiling in order to try to extort your vote. They have to rely on fear because they're not going to actually do what you need to have a decent and dignified life and a real, a secure future that we can survive in. So I said, reject their propaganda of powerlessness. This is like being in an abusive relationship where the abused is constantly making excuses for their abuser, like, oh, it'll get better next year, or, well, this is the best that I can do. No, it's actually true. You need to stand up and walk away and put your own life on, and our collective lives on a secure footing. We need to forget the lesser evil and fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because in fact they do. There's no way out of here through the lesser evil. They're interchangeable. Right now, there is no lesser evil, and they are all taking us over the cliff right now. This isn't just a future concern. This is about the very rapid movement up the escalatory ladder right now in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, the assault that just took place against Syria by Israel. This thing is just unbelievably dangerous and escalating right now, as it is in Ukraine as well, where NATO has just said they're going to take their nuclear weapons out of storage, where the U.S. has said we are bringing nuclear compatible missiles back to Germany, which means Russia's in basically in the target hairs as well. This is like violating one of the most essential nuclear treaties, which the U.S. Basically dismantled, the INF, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which did help reduce some of the most awful nuclear threats. Those are back now. They're back. We are back. It's now, the race to World War III. So don't buy the propaganda from the warmongers right now who thinks that we have a golden future right now with heading for a World War III and genocide wherever we want to conduct it. No, this doesn't work. We have to stand up and show the way forward, the only way forward.
And I know you probably don't care, but are you worried that you're going to be the Ralph Nader of this election and people will blame you for Biden losing?
I consider it a great honor to be compared to Ralph Nader.
Excellent. Are you worried at all about getting any negativity, hate, aggressiveness towards you for that?
Oh, it's already there. It's already there. They make it up. A spoiled election is a fallacy. We draw votes from people who otherwise won't vote. That is overwhelmingly where our voters come from. So when people object to my being in the campaign, my being in the race, they're basically objecting to people who have nothing to vote for being given a reason to vote. The rest is just manipulation.
Yeah. And have you decided on your running mate yet? Are you still reviewing that?
Yes, we have several active people under review right now. Yes.
And I
more about that soon.
And I heard Abdullah Hammoud at one point was considered, right? Is that accurate?
Oh, yes. That was a very strong possibility, but then it turned out his birthday was like 2 months too late.
Got it. So I have to ask this. Is there any chance that you and Cornell West would join forces?
I would. I absolutely would. And we have put that out to Cornell from the day he said, I got to run solo here. I can't run with the party. The party wanted him to engage in debates, for example. That was the one thing he complained about. Otherwise, it was a complete surprise to me when he said, I'm going to run solo. But not that much as a surprise, because it's very hard to build a relationship with a political party when you're both under the heat of a presidential campaign. It's very hard. I myself was recruited to run by the Green Party when I was not previously a member. And, it's very hard to work with a party when you haven't been with it for a long time. You don't know how it works, especially if it's an independent third party, because we don't have a campaign in a box. The Democrats will give you a campaign in a box. For independent, non-corporate grassroots parties, it doesn't work that way. You really need to know the players. So at any rate, from the very beginning, we offered Dr. West to run in a team where we could use our ballot lines, because he doesn't have ballot lines. He's not going to have ballot lines, which is why I had to jump into the race because we had very little time to mobilize. He only informed us like 3 weeks before we had a whole lot of paperwork due in order to secure the California ballot. So we had to immediately have a campaign. And so there were only 2 of us who could do that. It was Ajamu Baraka or myself. We had a long debate. He won the debate, so I had to step up and be the candidate. But we were offering to Cornell West from the start, let's find a way to do this together and ensure that there will be an anti-genocide candidate on the ballot, because as a newcomer without oodles of corporate money, you won't be able to do this. And what can I say? He's new to the game and learning as he goes, and has not been willing as of yet to consider doing that. If someone could talk him into it, it'd be great. We've certainly tried. A lot of people have tried. He seems to be comfortable in his solo role, which is how he has been a powerful commentator, throughout his career. He's been a powerful solo voice. And I think that's just a comfort zone for him.
Got it. And I think people get a little bit uncomfortable of not understanding or knowing how to get someone on the ballot. So for example, I live in Virginia. Wise, the executive producer who you met earlier, lives in Georgia. I think in Virginia, you're at 3,000 names or signatures. You need 5. I could be mistaken. Could you walk us through the process of how we get your name on the ballot?
So the best way to do this, this is made very complicated by design. Yeah. This is intended to keep challengers off the ballot on a national scale, because there are 50 different sets of rules and they're all changing. So you really need a dedicated political party in every state that has to watchdog the rules and has to stay on top of them. that's how we were able to enter into this race, already having the most difficult states already behind us. So the easiest way to figure this out is to go to our map, which is at jillstein2024.com. And if you click on the ballot access drop-down menu, you will get to the map, click on your state, and it will tell you what's needed in your state. In Georgia, they changed the rules this time, but in a way that oddly benefited us, because the new rule says that if you're already on the ballot in some 20 states, I forget what the limit is, it's 20 or 22, then you would automatically be on the ballot in Georgia. So we just gained ballot access in Georgia when they changed the law. We automatically gained access. So we're automatically on in Georgia. Yeah. Cornell is not, the other progressive candidates are not. We are the only anti-war, anti-genocide candidate that will be on the ballot in Georgia. In Virginia, I know that they have to collect signatures, and that's done through volunteer efforts, which are coordinated by both the local party as well as our campaign. And if you, again, just go to the map, click on Virginia, and get in touch with the person who shows up in that drop-down menu, because that will tell you how to get in touch, because we badly need help. We need help. This process is made extremely difficult, extremely labor-intensive, and unbelievably expensive. So we need all hands on deck here if we are going to take back our democracy and our lives, not only the lives of Palestinians, but our lives. If we're going to have livable lives here, we need a government that's working for us, not for big pharma and, the fossil fuel corporations. Yeah, we have to take it back. So think of the ballot access as that. This is about our future that's on the ballot, all of us.
Yeah, I mean, the process, I think, creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of confusion. And it tricks us into thinking that we do have to pick between two candidates no matter what. And it's unfortunate. For sure.
Yes. And I mean, I think there's just a whole slew of propaganda that's telling you that all the time. It's like every political message out there tells you that there are only two candidates and you've got to pick one. The ballot access process itself, that's more an internal thing. I mean, they try to sabotage it. In fact, the Democrats were caught red-handed. The DNC was caught red-handed advertising, doing a job posting for someone to manage infiltrators and spies to get into our ballot drives and mess them up. So they are making this difficult on all levels. They've hired an army of lawyers to challenge our petitions and to force us to go to court. But we really, urge people, you don't have to stay on top of this. Your job is to either lend a hand by gathering signatures. And to do that, just find your most convenient state and get in touch with the person who will show you exactly what to do. Your job is nothing more than, if you're going to carry petitions, your job is nothing more than to carry a clipboard and to talk to voters and say, hey, would you like to get a third choice onto the ballot? And depending on the neighborhood, do you want to get a choice onto the ballot who will actually pass rent control in your community as a federal policy, or who will stop the war on day one, who will stop the genocide of Palestine on day one? You have a simple pitch and you just ask people going by, and you get trained in this too. So it doesn't need to be an intimidating or difficult or scary process whatsoever. And you can go out in teams and with other groups, or you can just approach your friends and people who are already aligned with you. There are many ways to do it. And once it's broken down at the state level, there are people who can help you do it.
Got it. And you mentioned your anti-war component on your agenda. And I want to talk about the military budget a little bit, because people say, well, if you cut the military budget, then we're not going to be safe. We're going to be attacked. What would your response be to those individuals?
That we actually need for the Department of Defense to be a Department of Defense, not a Department of Offense. 800 military bases around the world is not about, protecting our safety here. It's about protecting markets. It's about regime change operations. And we've conducted some 70 of them, at least since the Second World War. And this doesn't make us a more secure world. It makes us far less. This is how we create the ongoing disasters in Iran, or the the endemic violence now throughout Latin America, because we've destroyed so many of their democracies. So militarism is not the road to stability. International law and human rights is the road to stability. And by spending half of our budget on the military, we don't have the money that we need here in order to survive. So we're harming ourselves. We're impoverishing our nation, and we're also endangering our nation. So it's just BS. We are spending as much as the next 10 biggest military spenders all combined. So if you cut that in half, we're still the biggest military spender. And when you combine us with our allies, we have a lot. But we're not going to survive here duking this out. We really need rules of international law. And we have to move as a country from thinking of ourselves as a monopolar empire that rules the world, which is how we're still behaving, to being a member of the global community and acting as a team, so that we don't seek to dominate all countries and all resources around the world. We have to, we live in a finite world, and we need to move from being the very adolescent bully in the schoolyard to being an adult member of the global community.
And just a few more questions, because I know you're extremely busy. Just to be clear, you would wipe away altogether student debt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we did that for the crooks on Wall Street. We can do that for young people who have been saddled with an unpayable debt burden. And by making public higher education free, we ensure that nobody going forward has to become, bogged down in unpayable student debt.
Yeah, it just drives me crazy. The billions that are going to Israel that could be used for so much back here at home is just ridiculous.
Yes. Why are we paying for healthcare, in Israel when we don't have it here? Essentially, that's what we're doing by offloading their military expenses.
And free education too, I believe, in Israel. Correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So my last question is really just to open the floor for you, for anybody who may be on the fence or who may be considering voting for you. What would you like to say to them?
I would say the clock is ticking. We are living in a world right now of crushing inequality, climate collapse, endless war, verging on nuclear, and a growing assault on our democracy, which is the flip side of all our other policies that are basically creating very desperate masses of humanity in this country and around the world. This is the neoliberal agenda of austerity, of privatization, of basically taking away the security and the dignity of human life around the world, which especially is being conducted by our war machine, which is especially robbing us blind. This is not going to get fixed by the parties of war on Wall Street. We've been through this. We've done this many times before. They are not coming around. So the question is, are we going to save ourselves or not? No one's going to do it for us. No one is going to do it for us. We need to stand up and demand an America and a world that works for all of us. This is actually within our reach if we stand up with the courage of our convictions and make it happen. So go to JillStein2024.com, join the team, and we'll be unstoppable together. Thank you so very much. And thank you so much, Ed, for this wonderful interview.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.